Thanks to all of you. It's great to be here. I don't see enough of this place. I'm here about a couple of days every month. I love coming out, and it's wonderful to introduce another group to Amherst College. Unlike the other people who've spoken to you while you've been here at Amherst, I'm not an academic, and yet I think I have made use of the education I got at Amherst College, specifically a liberal arts education, about as deeply as it's possible to get use out of everything. You know, people complain about the cost of a four-year education, and it's going on 45 years since I got here, and so like the cost per day of my education is down to about the cost of a Starbucks latte. And because there isn't a day that goes by when somehow the experience of Amherst isn't something I draw on in my work. And that's partly because I'm a magazine editor, and I range over many, many different topics. There's virtually no topic that I don't cover. And so, you know, a liberal arts kind of education is ideal for that. But more than that, it's because of the way in which a liberal arts education works on you. It instills a way of thinking and certain standards of critique and a certain kind of curiosity that just is applicable to anything. That's the real reason why I find myself using it virtually every single day. Before I came here this morning, I just noticed in my living room two things that that didn't have any kind of connection in their original lives, but have a connection now, and they're connected to my children. One of them is my grandfather's spurs from when he was in the Army Air Corps in 1917, and was, what are we doing with spurs in an airplane? I don't know, but they are his spurs, and he was on the Pancho Villa campaign, and so was down in Mexico with the Army in 1917. That same year, my children's grandfather, Jesse Torres, was coming the other direction from Mexico to the United States. And in my living room, I also have the document that was put together when his family and him came across the Rio Grande. He was an infant, but there's a document that's just for him. And it's a bureaucratic document, and it has his birth date, the usual particulars, and it says method of arrival, and someone has written in the word rowboat. So these two documents, which, as I say, had no connection when they first came into existence, now have a connection because my kids are related to both of these people. And it's just an astonishing thing to think about. So that's one of the reasons why history is always so appealing, I think. You just can't help yourself. But the other reason is because you're tempted to think history must be telling us something.
Yeah. I'm a fan of this common misattribution to Mark Twain. History doesn't repeat itself, but it rhymes.
Right.
And I'm sort of one of those people that I see it practically everywhere around me. It's, I would stand on the deck of my ship and sort of imagine triremes.
Well, exactly, and yes, that is a great quotation, and every time I hear it, the other thought I have is, well, that sounds true, but do I know the poem it's from? I mean, I know what it means, but then wondering what's the larger. Once you know it rhymes, what do you make of the rhyme?
Well, I believe that yes, I do believe, or should I say, I've learned from history. I believe it has a lot to do with your social standing as well, because those that have no need to look to the past don't do it. So I truly believe that if I don't learn something, or if I don't look to the past, I'm never able to really move forward. I don't know if it's a bigger idea, or if it's just me, because I don't know. Or rather, the quote, if you don't look to the past, you're doomed to repeat it. So I take a lot of heart in that, so I don't make the same mistakes.
And just talk a little bit more about social standing. I mean, just unpack that a bit more.
So social standing meaning we talk a lot about the framers and how they created the Declaration of Independence, meaning those that particularly are in a higher, let's say, a wealthier monetary standing in this instance, and those that have to work a little harder, meaning farmers, industrial workers. So for me, I believe that where you are in your life has a lot to do with the fact that, like, where your ancestors came from. The fact that you may not have had to work as hard to get to where you are versus those who had to. So in essence, I'm calling on the fact that because your ancestors told you, hey, we worked hard to get to this point, but if you never got that idea, you had it from the beginning, then you may not have thought a great deal about where you came from.
Mm-hmm. It is a fascinating question, just the relationship of your social standing and what you think of the past, and it's related to another question. I mean, we're not going to go down this rabbit hole, but it's related to another question, which is the way in which there's a two-way street involved here. History is talking in some fashion to the present, but it doesn't talk at all unless the present is making it talk. And the present has, in a way, an influence on history. The present is changing history because it's changing our understanding of history all the time. And so this dialectic between past and present, it's enormously complicated, but wonderfully understanding. When you spoke about the founders, did you read Danielle Allen's book?
We did, yes.
Yeah. Any thought about that? About her book? I just happened to find it riveting, but.
Well, yeah, we all did. The issue of equality came up, and the fact that, for instance, in the book she talked about how she taught two different classes, like the night class, she was trying to teach her about the Declaration of Independence versus the bright-eyed, bushy-tailed convention of students, and how she had to change, I guess, or make it real to those who traditionally had no stock in it. She chose to, or rather, she had to make sure that they understood they had stock in it, to put faith in them that they should believe in this document. So yes, I definitely believe that in essence that has a lot to do with history because we think of ourselves as people, as a nation. So equality has a lot to do with like where we came from.
So another thing is the agonizing over whether you can keep your society a republic. And we know that the Romans didn't succeed in that. They, for the last 100 years, BC, basically, they were fighting civil war after civil war. And heroic people were trying to keep this something that was other than a monarchy, other than a dictatorship, other than an empire. And when you read Roman literature from that period of time, people like Cato, and you read what they're writing politically, people like Cicero, you can see that they have an idea of what is a good political construct, and how are we going to preserve this in the face of all these other forces that are aligning against us, and people more or less suspect that the slide into some different kind of society is inevitable and can't be stopped, something that is more authoritarian, something that has their version of secret police, something where people don't have a say in the way in which they are governed. They can see this happening in front of their eyes. They're trying to dig in their heels and prevent it, and but kind of know that they can't. And this was a haunting idea for the people who founded our own country. They were wondering, okay, we've got the Declaration of Independence, we've got a Constitution, we're ready to go. Let's get started. But there's that famous, comment of Ben Franklin's at the Constitutional Convention when he's asked, what kind of a government do we have, Mr. Franklin? And he said, well, we have a republic if you can keep it. Well, can you keep it? And people like Madison and Washington and Hamilton creating the system of checks and balances in order to prevent the inevitable slide into something else. Anyway, this preoccupied the founders much as it preoccupied people like Cato. At Valley Forge, George Washington put on a play about Cato, which tells you something about the degree to which it was on our minds. This looms to me as a very large point of comparison, especially in the last 20 years or so. And let me just pause there and wonder if you have anything to say about that. Just the intersection of current events, as you're aware of them, with the idea of our governance structures. You worried at all about this? Anyone?
I think I'm reminded of a quote, and it's summed up as something democracy can't survive violence. And I remember just a brief history of the Roman Republic where people make the claims that the murder of the Gracchus brothers were like back during the early days of the Republic, where they were essentially, and I don't mean this in a bad way, those populist people who appealed to like the lower class and try to get them into stuff, and the Senate and the upper class didn't like it, and they ended up murdering them. And just the whole thing is, the claim that people make is that when you have when violence is introduced into a democracy, it's a Pandora's box. You can't shut that. So, violence becomes normalized until you end up with the rule of the strong. The democracy just can't survive that violence. And I'm sure we can all draw comparisons to America, where violence was used on famous political people, and it makes me wonder whether that door's been opened or not.
It's this period of time to which the name the social wars is given, in which Roman society is kind of coming apart. There are vast differences in equality in terms of wealth, nothing like what they're going to become, by the way, but bad by comparison with what existed before. You had their version of the 1% running things and their version of the 99% not liking that fact, and power shifted over time between representatives of the 99% and representatives of the 1%. People like the Gracchi brothers, representing the 99% getting killed, but people representing the 1% getting killed too, outright civil war, and all because a breakdown of the agreement on what we would call the social compact. And, this whole period of time, the smart people are thinking, how do we solve this problem? And they never really do. The solution is autocracy. It's Augustus, basically, and that's the rest of the story. It's a period, I think, that much as the Civil War in American history is like the period to study, I think, if you want to learn everything about the soul of America and American politics. The social wars in Rome explain an awful lot about the way in which societies are put together. So back to the question about just looking at our republic now. Cause for concern? Yeah.
So our first seminar was with Austin Surratt.
Mm-hmm.
And one of the things that
I'll bet he's concerned.
He's very much so, but he found a glimmer of hope in a very unusual place. So initially he showed us these polls, statistics, etc., about as age cohorts get more and more contemporary, that there's less and less of a feeling that democratic values are important. And of course, along with that, along with increasing apathy, there's gradually increasing support, or at least indifference to the possibility of autocracy in the United States. But then the thing he went on to say is that he sees hope in the election of Donald Trump, in the sense that because people have become so impassioned about it, that it'll cause them to re-engage with democratic and lowercase r, of course, Republican process.
And what do you think of that argument?
I think he's correct. I think we see more and more of, no matter how you feel about it, more and more of constitutional tests, the various states suing the executive over executive orders, etc. And I think it's drawing people out. I think frequently, though, there's a lot more heat than light. Earlier, Sid, our director, was talking about this idea that both sides are seeing each other as evil, and that we simply won't talk to each other. So that then there's a danger there. People get more and more involved, and you just end up with people fighting in the streets all over Weimar.
Rome and America are compared militarily all the time, with good cause, I think. In both cases, there's a huge amount of territory to be protected, or acquired. There's not enough manpower, and it was all manpower then, to do all the jobs that need to be doing, the imperial overstretch idea. The training is superb. There's been nothing, when the Romans come along, there's been nothing like it in history up to that point. The training manuals survive really virtually intact from the Roman Empire at its peak. For all I know, you may have even read some of these, but they're fascinating. There's detailed, as a field manual might be now, both in terms of strategy, overarching strategy, or in terms of how you deploy troops, or in terms of how you create camps, build camps on the fly, down to how you train for individual jobs in the military. These are extraordinary documents. The degree of regimentation. They had dog tags. The horses had dog tags also. Makes you wonder why they are called dog tags. But the physical remains just of the Roman military operation are hard to avoid. I think the United States has something like 700 military bases around the world of some sort. Rome had 300 just in Britain. It's hard to travel around England and avoid a Roman camp. You'll see signs on just little roads, there'll be little markers saying this way to the Roman camp. But the other thing about the Roman situation is something that happens that I'd like to hear you talk about, and that is, over time, there is a divide between who is in the military and everybody else in society. And it comes about for complicated reasons. Partly it's because the military needs to be professionalized in a certain way, and it's more of a full-time career rather than something that a rich person does just as part of their lives. Partly it's because lots of people in society just can't be bothered. Let's pay somebody else to do it. And over time it gets to the point where really most of society is absenting itself from the job, and it's getting contracted out to others. And it becomes a very dangerous situation when you have, for instance, an emperor who comes from the military ranks and just despises the people who live in Rome, finds them effete, pampered, with no understanding of the real world, people who have abandoned the traditional Roman values and failed to pony up the resources needed to actually protect the thing that they're living in and sucking dry. Any of this sound familiar? And that's the story basically of the last 300 years of the empire in the West. The military never stops being an extraordinary enterprise and machine, but the dynamic inside society changes radically to the detriment of the entire, let's call it civilization.
I personally joined the military out of a sense of civic service, civic duty, and the background I was coming from, I didn't need money for college or anything. I thought that I was so privileged that I needed to give back to the country in a way. And yeah, I know it's not necessarily everyone's duty to join the military, but I think from my perspective, it would be nice to see more people involved with the betterment of the country or protection of it, or helping veterans like we're doing here today. It's a little bit of how I feel about it.
Mm-hmm. Tracy?
I think the same thing. There isn't really a relation between citizens and the military, and that ultimately can bring a lot of issues, because it starts to become this thing where maybe the military is praised differently than other institutions would be. And you talk about in your book that can create arrogance now. Like the Romans had arrogance, and you compare that to America now. And it's almost something we can see that you can't tell us we're wrong because people no longer have that relation with us.
And what about, though, I mean, I can certainly see that a division of that kind could breed that kind of arrogance on both sides. People who are not in the military are often very quick to stereotype the military as well. But what about from inside the military? Do you hear what strike you as legitimate critiques of of society outside the military? What form does it take?
I think it holds some truth. I think we see ourselves almost above them.
Mm-hmm.
That we're in the military, and again, it kind of comes into this arrogance that we're bred differently. That we do all these different things, and that civilians, we aren't the same almost.
Right. Yes.
I think a lot of it is like we'll take our past accomplishments and make that the reason why we're so great, and that since somebody else hasn't had those experiences, they've got no idea what they're talking about. And oftentimes we'll almost see our own internal evil manifest in other people. Like we'll see their unwillingness to work or understand us, but we're at the same exact time not doing that same thing. We're not going to try to understand them, and that's almost like the wedge kind of driving us apart.
The situation that you're describing, which I think is fundamentally true, is that just looking ahead 20 years, 30 years, is that changing, or is it more of the same?
I think there's a possibility to change. With any government or leadership, you have to remember where the power comes from. You get your power from the people. So in essence, I think as far as the military goes, I think about many reasons. I guess for many of us, we came in, like you said, for a sense of duty. We want to do something bigger than ourselves. I think about how the royal family, they sent their sons on the military. For instance, I thought that was kind of weird because I didn't think you had to. But for me, I joined because, again, a sense of duty and the fact that I want to remain connected to the people. Like, I come home and people realize, actually my mom thinks I joined the Army for a long time, so I had to correct her. But I told her, I'm in the Navy, so she said, okay, well, that's cool. So when you come back, what can you do with that? I was like, I want to continue to help people. It's like you come into a room, like for many of us, we go around civilians, for some reason they get that feeling. They're like, oh, were you in the military? I said, how do you know? We give off a sense of something that people feed off. And I think for many of us, we want to use that to continue the connection with the people to help.
Mm-hmm.
And like you say, we as simple military, we were kind of held on a pedestal because we did something that either they deemed something they couldn't do, or maybe they just didn't want to do. So I think if we can stay connected to the people, we can use that.
Yeah, and I mean that's a good solution for you and everyone else in the room, and I do find myself wondering about the rest of society. in a way, you have an advantage. You are all in the process of going back into, excuse me, into the rest of society. But the rest of society will never have had the experience that you've had. And I wonder whether, whether they ever will. Unlike my father's generation, where virtually everyone was in the military, and at least for a while, my father was in the Second World War, and then with the draft up through the mid '70s, something was very different about the fabric of the country. We're just about out of time, and I just wanted to just close with a woman named Hilary Mantel. I don't know if that name means anything to you. She wrote a novel called Wolf Hall. Wolf, like the animal, Hall. And it's about a man named Thomas Cromwell. And he was an advisor to Henry VIII, very influential, and very effective until he crossed a line and was beheaded. But the novels she's written about him, these historical novels, are really wonderful. And she recently gave a series of lectures for the BBC, and I was reading them, and a lot of what she has to talk about is history. When is it legitimate to use history for something? The question we were talking about at the very beginning. And what does history teach you? And one of her lectures is really about the fact that the most important thing that history teaches you, or should teach you, is just your own fallibility. That you can't, there are a lot of things you can look at history and just say, well, that lesson doesn't work out, that lesson doesn't hold up. But it's hard to look at history and just say, boy, the lesson that human beings are fallible does not hold up. Because that one does hold up. And that idea of fallibility is essential just in decision making. And one of the things you were reading was Lincoln's second inaugural, and that's a document that's steeped in the idea of fallibility. It's both a sad and a motivating document for that reason. Lincoln is still not sure that he has behaved right. And he's not sure that anybody else has behaved correctly either. And yet, we're doing the best we can, and yet we may suffer even more for it. He's not one of these people who is saying, I know the truth, we're going to go down this path, everyone else be damned, because I have seen the light and it is real. He's not saying that at all. He says, in fact, almost literally, I'm going to try to do the right thing to the extent that I can figure out the right thing. As God gives me to see the right. Isn't that the phrase he uses? It's not like what is right, but as God gives, or you could say history gives, something gives, but with whatever tools you have, trying to see the right, but humbly. And so Lincoln, I think in his second inaugural address, is really saying the same thing that Hilary Mantel is saying in these remarkable lectures that she did for the BBC about how fallibility is the most important lesson that we can learn from history, and in many ways it's what protects us the most in our present lives, is just remembering that fact. And I think Lincoln would say, and Hilary Mantel does say, that it's the essential quality for citizens in a democracy. It's just the remembrance of fallibility. So I'll leave you with Hillary Mantel, and Abraham Lincoln, which is better than leaving you with me. But and thanks for coming to Amherst, and good luck with what lies ahead. Thanks very much.